Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of the Seven Investing Podcast. I'm Seven Investing founder and CEO Simon Erickson. I'm joined by my colleague, Seven Investing lead advisor, Maxx Chatsko. Max, I hear that it's a balmy day up there in Pittsburgh for you today.
Yes, 40 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius. Now that we have an earbud on the team, we got to always differentiate between the two. But now you can take your second winter coat off, Simon. So it's pretty nice.
That is a cold day for us down in Texas, and not so bad, I guess, for you up there in Pittsburgh. But everyone, we're not here to talk about the weather today. We're actually going to be talking about the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference going on right now. Always a big event, always big announcements that come out of this. Certainly of interest for you, Max, who follows life sciences and healthcare. And you've spotted us up with, thus far, a couple of the big reveals that you've noticed out of JP Morgan this year. I'd like to just kind of walk through those one at a time and let you tell me what you think of all of these. But the first that you mentioned was some announcements from Illumina, a company that's really famous for its genetic sequencing machines.
Yeah, Illumina had a number of different reveals, and this feels, at a high level, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference feels like it's back. Like years ago, we used to get really big reveals, really big things, right? The $1,000 genome was announced at a JP Morgan Healthcare Conference years ago. And this one just has a feel like all these companies, we've seen valuations rise, and they came out with some really big announcements, maybe to try to justify those or steer investors to like what to look for in the coming years as well. So Illumina had another big JP Morgan Healthcare Conference, made a number of announcements. The first was for Grail. The first we're going to talk about anyway. So this is the liquid biopsy company. It originally started this as a subsidiary within Illumina. It spun it out. It just reacquired it. I'm not so sure, regulators are going to allow that to proceed. It might get unwound eventually, but nonetheless, right now, it is a part of Illumina. So Grail is launching and has launched actually the first multi-cancer early detection product, first of its kind that's in the market. So if you look at the specs that they've released for this, and we kind of already knew from a large perspective study earlier, the specs are not really great in terms of like high specificity or high sensitivity, but early cancers are very difficult to detect. The signals that's in your bloodstream are not very high. So it's very difficult to tease this out, the signal versus the noise. Nonetheless, this will help to, detect earlier cancers that might have gone undetected otherwise. So this could still save lives. But it's important to point out, this is still like batting practice in a 9-inning ball game, right? Where we're at with this technology right now for early detection stuff. But nonetheless, out there right now in the market, it's going to be offered as a laboratory developed test. This isn't FDA cleared or FDA approved. That would require pre-market approval. Future products will probably need that in order to be used in the largest segments of the market. And this is specifically suggested for use in individuals that are maybe already receiving other types of screening or at higher risk of cancer, so like older individuals. So look for this tech to significantly improve over the years. I actually took a screenshot of the spec list because I was sitting here thinking like, in 5 years or 10 years, we're going to look back at this and it's going to be amazing how much better all this tech has gotten, not just for Grail, but for some of these competitors as well. Company also announced new chemistry. So, DNA sequencing, we talk about machines all the time, Simons, right? Sequencing machines on the size of a refrigerator, maybe they're on a desktop, really expensive. They got all the glory. But really, the business model in lab hardware is to sell the machines. You sell that once, and then you get recurring revenue by selling the consumables revenue again and again and again. So the customers can run those machines. So Illumina is kind of like a chemical business, really, right? Like most of its revenue, I think 70% in the first 9 months of 2021 came from consumables. Much less came from machines. That's kind of interesting. But they've unveiled some new chemistry improvements. At this point, it's maybe like incremental improvements, but that's really good for Illumina because it has an installed base, very large, lots of customers. And the longer you can keep them on those machines or make those machines work better, get better data, faster, cheaper, all those things. So this new chemistry will be unveiled or rolled out rather in the coming year or two. So that's important development for shareholders as well. The biggest news, of course, from Illumina was that it unveiled a long read tech that's been working on called Infinity. So this can read up to 10,000 bases of DNA. And we only got like one slide. There's not a whole lot of details there. There's no specs. So we can't really get too carried away. Although the market kind of did, right? Illumina shares were up like 15% or something. This is not a small startup. This is a pretty big, large global company. Pretty big day for Illumina shareholders. And rivals like PacBio and Oxford Nanopore Oxford Nanopore. Wow, I got tripped up on one of my favorite companies. Both saw their shares decline yesterday on the news as well. Now, it's important to point out, so we have no specs, and this is up to 10,000 bases of genetic material that this can possibly read. So that's not as long as PacBio, definitely not as long as Oxford Nanopore, which can read hundreds of thousands of base pairs at a time. Nonetheless, the important takeaway here is that it can be used on existing Illumina platforms. So there's a huge installed base out there. And if you could run short read and long read on the same machine, that's pretty catchy, right? I think a lot of customers are going to be interested in this and give it a try. So that could be a pretty big headwind for PacBio, which is still emerging. It's still trying to scale. It needs to sell a lot more machines to reach that critical mass of installed base out in the wild. So this could be a pretty fierce headwind for PacBio. I don't really see it being a major deal for Oxford Nanopore. It's a little bit of a headwind, perhaps. Maybe it slows down some of their customer acquisition and so forth. But with Nanopore, it's so sufficiently different. The machines are much smaller. They're much lower cost to begin with. And you can already run short and long and ultra long read on Nanopore. So I don't see it really affecting that company nearly as much. This early access program doesn't open up until the second half of 2022. So this is still a long time away, right? From maybe having any, we can't gauge how it's going to do in the market or how it might impact the competitive landscape. But the commercial advantage Illumina has, I would not sleep on this. I would be a little shaky if I'm PacBio right now. So we'll see how that plays out in the next 12 to 18 months.
Now, Max, this is an interesting one because you and I have a long-standing bet regarding the market cap of Illumina in the future, the market share that Illumina is going to have in the sequencing market in the future. Of course, it seemed like always the knock against Illumina was long read sequencing, right? We always got used to Illumina's next generation sequencing. Of course, that's short read. Always the PacBio, the Oxford Nanopores were always the, hey, Simon, don't you see where the future is going here? And it seems like Illumina's tried and failed due to regulators to make acquisitions to try to make up for that incompetency that it had, that it wasn't addressing long read sequencing. You think that this is a defensive play, that now they're trying to develop it in-house so they can kind of keep competitors at bay? I know that Illumina for many years was the economical option, had higher throughput, it had the larger machines, it depreciated over time. But it does seem like the market wants longer read sequencing. Is Illumina doing this to try to keep its competitors from stealing share and Maxx Chatsko ultimately winning this bet?
Yeah, they're trying to keep me from winning our bet, I think. So yeah, the way I read it, if you have like a longitudinal analysis of the competitive landscape and you've been following this for years, as you and I have, I don't think Illumina's strategy has really changed. You can see, years ago, they were really fiercely contending with Oxford Nanopore and Court, trying to slow them down a little bit, right? And Oxford Nanopore is kind of the reason that the Illumina PacBio acquisition didn't play out, right? The UK regulators came down pretty hard, made it easy for Illumina to walk away there. So then again, Illumina was trying to acquire PacBio, again, needing to combine short read and long read to position itself for where the field was headed. Now it couldn't do that, so it said, hey, you know what? We're just going to develop this in-house. So again, we don't have too many specs. We don't know how good it is, but I consider it long enough read, right? It's not really like longer than PacBio. It's not longer than Oxford Nanopore, but good enough, long enough. So yeah, this is exactly, the company positioning itself strategically for the next decade here in DNA sequencing.
Definitely want to keep an eye on there. Illumina, ticker on that is ILNN. Let's go to another company, Max. Another one that had a big announcement was Twist Biosciences doing DNA synthesis. What's the news on this one?
Yeah, we just talked about DNA sequencing, so that's reading DNA, and Twist Biosciences DNA synthesis, that's writing DNA. And since their inception, they really kind of played down this next generation technology called enzymatic DNA synthesis. So they use different chemistries right now with their silicon chips, and they've said, enzymatic synthesis is still not economical. We don't really see that being the future. We're well positioned anyway. If it does emerge, like we can use it within our existing infrastructure, our existing synthesizers, right? And then at JP Morgan, they said, hey, guess what, guys? We've been working on enzymatic synthesis for the last 18 months. So I was like, hey, no kidding. So there's a lot of companies in the competitive landscape that are kind of trying to develop this technology. So it's just closer to what nature does when it's trying to make, genetic material. It has a higher ceiling in terms of the, throughput it can get, how much DNA it can synthesize, how low the cost can go than what we do today. So it's obviously the future, even though it's still not ready for prime time or commercialization. But it's good to see Twist Bioscience take a step here develop this in-house. It can maybe launch it to its own customers eventually. It even kind of teased that, hey, you know what, we might make different products for this. We can see enzymatic synthesis being really well suited for decentralized DNA synthesis. So rather than you order from Twist and they make it in their large facility that's centralized, maybe eventually have kit products or something for customers where they can do it on their own, or who knows, maybe, you know, one day Twist Bioscience has synthesizer machines it sells as a desktop model. Not it's a very tricky business model, so I wouldn't be I don't think they're going to do that anytime soon, but maybe years from now they could do that. Enzymatic synthesis kind of opens that door. So for now, Twist Bioscience customers are going to be using the standard chemistry they have right now, which is still the best thing in the industry by a mile. But you know, over the coming years, enzymatic synthesis could be an option for customers. So it's pretty interesting to see them make this move from a technological standpoint.
And are we starting to see markets adopting DNA synthesis now, Max? I know that you've been kind of an expert on synthetic biology for several years now. I know that we just republished your podcast with Andrew Hessel very recently here. Are markets catching on to the power of this, and where would you consider Twist to be versus its competitors? Are they the leader in this? Are they one of many options to choose from? How does a company actually choose who to work with?
I mean, there's other options in Twist Bioscience in the market, right? So it's still a pretty fragmented space. But if you read through SEC filings, Twist is actually the OEM for many of its competitors. So I think that's a pretty strong signal of where they are in the competitive landscape. In terms of like where we're at, I mean, it's still very early, right? You synthesize DNA maybe for like high throughput genetic engineering, but there's not really that many companies doing that or many labs that need that. So synthetic DNA is still catching on. A lot of times it's still much easier if you have an army of, you know, grad students to be able to like clone things yourself in your own lab. That's kind of slowly giving way though. I mean, it really is great if you can get the turnaround times down and it's very highly accurate, which Twist Bioscience can accomplish. So that does give it an advantage in terms of, you know, changing behaviors, right? The status quo is kind of their biggest competitor right now in terms of how biology is done. So it's going to be maybe a long haul here for the company, but they've done very well moving into markets that are ready now. So, for example, you know, Twist Bioscience's DNA is really the quietly the driving force behind a lot of, you know, next generation sequencing tools and panels, liquid biopsies, genetic testing. So, very big market for them. They're still just kind of scratching the surface there, and those markets are still in their infancy. So, very smart management here at the company. You know, doing what they can now and eventually, you know, delivering on that grand vision of, hey, we can synthesize DNA maybe anywhere for different uses we're not doing today. So great company, very well led.
Well, let's double click on that genetic testing and the liquid biopsies. Let's talk about diagnostics a little bit. The next update that you have is on Exact Sciences. That's a diagnostics company. What they talk about at JP Morgan this year?
They also had a flurry of announcements here, Simon. So they announced preliminary fourth quarter 2021 operating results, beat guidance for revenue on all three of its segments. So screening, precision oncology, and COVID testing. COVID testing is not so important, right? We all know that's going to be a temporary, you know, business for the company. But nonetheless, I mean, you know, we saw maybe there were some signs that with the Omicron wave or the Delta wave last year, maybe slowing some of the screening revenue. And then the COVID testing revenue would pick up to maybe offset some of that volatility. So it was a nice thing to have. And they had some spare capacity. So it made sense for them to do that. They announced a license of the Zerna Tumor Microenvironment Panel, TME panel. Simon, that's a mouthful, from a company called Oxerna. So this is going to help the company expand into biopharma, drug development, offer better services here for some of those companies. We've seen, of course, companies like Personalis or Invitae try to develop services here as well. So good to see, you know, Exact Sciences making some moves, trying to, you know, be well positioned in the competitive landscape. And of course, it has the largest scale of a lot of these companies. So that certainly helps to throw that around. It also announced an acquisition of a company called Prevention Genetics. And this moves Exact Sciences into hereditary cancer testing. So this is what Invitae does really for, you know, its bread and butter right now. Now, Prevention Genetics is a pretty small company. It's only 1/10 or less than 1/10 really of the revenue of Invitae. So it's still very small. But, you know, Exact Sciences, again, has that scale. It can leverage a lot of its commercial infrastructure. Probably going to quickly scale this business. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see additional like bolt-on acquisitions, genetic testing, molecular testing, still highly fragmented spaces. So lots of little companies out there that maybe a company like Exact Sciences can go and gobble up.
Sounds like a good one. The ticker on Exact Sciences is EXAS. By the way, for Twist Biosciences, if you want to follow that one, that's TWST. One more update here, Max, was on Beam Therapeutics. Let's get back into the chemistry again. This is another company that's doing some really fun foundational science. What's the update that we got from JP Morgan?
Yeah, Beam Therapeutics is one of the most richly valued drug developers that's not even in clinical trials yet. But, it does deserve a premium. Not sure if it deserves a $5 billion valuation, but nonetheless, it is the leader right now in CRISPR base editing, really leader in base editing, period, no matter what system's being used. It announced a huge 4-year research collaboration with Pfizer. So it earned a $300 million upfront payment. That's a lot of money for an upfront payment, especially for, a therapeutic modality. It's still not even clinically validated yet. So lots of excitement, obviously, for base editing and CRISPR base editing specifically. Beam Therapeutics can also earn milestone payments and royalties if any programs reach the market. Of course, that's many years away because this is still a research collaboration. We're still figuring out how to exactly deliver these things, where they need to go in the body. Something that stood out to me that maybe isn't obvious to a lot of others is this is a pretty unusual structure for the collaboration. So they're initially going to pursue 3 different genetic targets in 3 different tissue types: liver, muscle, and central nervous system, or CNS. Now that's unusual because what usually happens is a company will come in and partner with an emerging therapeutic modality, and they'll focus on a single tissue type, right? A single area. Like we're just going to start in the liver with the first 4 programs, and we'll go from there. So this is interesting. I mean, it's almost, to me, it's like Pfizer's maybe giving Beam Therapeutics a tryout. Maybe years from now, if they have successes, they'll say, all right, we'll take 4 more programs in the liver, 2 more in the muscle, and 1 more in the central nervous system. Maybe even, setting the stage for a future acquisition. Again, Beam Therapeutics, I think, is richly valued. But there are a handful of companies that really do deserve big premiums. I'm not sure it deserves it to be this big yet, but could be a nice acquisition target. And of course, Pfizer has record levels of cash after its success from, the COVID vaccines. It has some oral pills rolling out this year as well that could maybe add to its cash balance. So, this one might actually make sense for an acquisition target years from now. So interesting structure to the deal that stood out to me.
And it's interesting, right? Because like you've mentioned many times for 7 Investing here, that we kind of had the first wave of gene editing, but then we've kind of got the second and third waves that you're really interested in, the base editing and then the prime editing. Seems like Beam is a nice contender for those with some really cool chemistries that they're working on. Of course, David Liu, the founder, kind of the technical advisor to this company, maybe a big part to play in Pfizer paying so much money up front to give them a tryout and an audition for this. What do you think about the management or the chemistry that's going on here, Max?
Oh yeah, I mean, Beam Therapeutics has done a great job executing so far, even though they're not in the clinic, right? Licensing out their technology to different companies to kind of spread and diversify both challenges and risks for shareholders. So that's great. It's been able to earn premium, upfront payments like we just see here. $300 million is no joke. It's larger than a lot of other companies playing around this space, right? Look, the potential value of base editing, whether it's CRISPR or some other enzymatic system or maybe an oligo in the future, is that it doesn't make double-stranded breaks in the genome. So that's what we saw with first-generation gene editors, right? Your Intellias, your CRISPR Therapeutics, Precision Biosciences, Selectus, companies like that. And, there's still this question mark. I mean, double-stranded breaks could maybe lead to some not so great unintended consequences and side effects like long-term risks of cancer. So that it might be better to avoid that with something a little more precise, something that doesn't make double-stranded breaks. So something like a base editor makes a lot of sense. And you alluded to anyway, prime medicine, prime editing. There's obviously still not in the clinic either. It's a 3rd-generation tools. Pretty interesting though, right? I mean, CRISPR kind of came out, and now we're just making these improvements to it with every generation that comes out. Now there's other systems that aren't even based on CRISPR too, showing that. So it kind of paved the way for all this to be possible. But yeah, absolutely. David Liu being attached to any company is going to help to earn it a premium valuation.
Always certainly nice to see $300 million capital infusion for a partnership. That's really great news. But let's close this out, Max. Let's talk about this from an investing perspective. Let's talk about M&A. Let's talk about the mergers and acquisitions. Just as a kind of a side note, before we go into what JP Morgan has to do with this, we actually saw one of your recommendations on 7 Investing, Dicerna Pharmaceuticals. a 3-time recommendation of Maxx Chatsko, just get acquired here by Novo Nordisk. The only reason we are able to announce that, we never reveal our publicly our recommendations, but because we did remove it from the scorecard. The acquisition has closed. There's no further gains. It was a cash offer for investors. Really great work on first of all picking that one up, Max. But let me ask you: are there more acquisitions on the forefront here? I mean, what's going on at JP Morgan? It's been kind of a slow year for M&A and biotech, really, right?
Yeah, maybe a couple years. I don't know, since the pandemic, maybe in a little bit before that. But M&A activity in drug development has been pretty slow. Everyone's sitting around like, well, all right, well, is this the year it picks up? It wasn't last year. It wasn't, so maybe it's this year. It kind of makes sense if you look at it one way, right? A lot of these large companies are sitting on record amounts of cash. There are a plethora of smaller companies out there, even privately held companies, doing some really interesting work. I mean, things are developing faster and faster, and we kind of do, there's still a lot of biology. We certainly have no idea how it works, and it's very complex, but we are starting to answer more questions with each passing year. So a lot of analysts, a lot of reporters are asking pretty much every one of the big pharma companies, hey, when are you guys going to start acquiring things again? So it's kind of funny to see what the CEOs said. And they're all kind of, I don't know if they have the same PR specialist, some collusion maybe, I don't know. But they all said, hey, you know what? We're good where we're at. They have some share repurchases going on. They said maybe we want to do some smaller bolt-on acquisitions. They all said that term, bolt-on acquisitions. So what we've seen is there haven't been like big splashy deals, right? Tens of billions of dollar valuations at the time of an acquisition. And a lot of large companies have said, in the recent past, hey, look, valuations are kind of crazy right now. We might have a lot of cash, but we still have to be good stewards for our own shareholders. So we're not just going to be slinging around money for acquisitions like it's candy. So they've been disciplined, is what I'll say. But I do think we'll see some of these, M&A deals start to pick up this year. Again, record levels of cash. Valuations are starting to make more sense a little bit. So, in the last 2 years, we have seen acquisitions, but they've just been very small, like $100 million, less than $400 million. Lots of those little tiny deals. Again, bolt-on acquisitions. So I think investors can expect more of those types of deals, but maybe we'll see the definition of small acquisition kind of creep up closer to like the $1 billion mark. Again, there's just so much cash out there, lots of interesting companies. Wouldn't be surprised to start to see some more M&A activity this year, Simon.
We'll be looking forward to it, Max. Thanks very much for joining the podcast here today.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
For anyone who wanted to follow along, again, Illumina, Twist Biosciences, Exact Sciences, and Beam Therapeutics, and M&A were the topics that Max discussed on today's podcast as the big reveals thus far from the 2022 JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. I'm Seven Investing founder and CEO Simon Erickson. Thanks for tuning into this episode. We'll talk to you again soon with another innovative topic. Until then, we're here to empower you to invest in your future. We are Seven Investing.